Hey everybody, my name is Gilad Goldstein and I'm here today with Kenra Professional to walk you through how to cut a short bob haircut. Now this is one of my favorite haircuts for my clients who are looking to show off their fashion because it really highlights the neck and the jawline. So it's really great if you're looking to wear a lot of accessories or if your clients want to show off their earrings. This cut is super versatile, creates a lot of texture, and it's been worn by a lot of celebrities. So if you have clients who are looking to make the big chop, this is definitely a cut you're going to want to master. So grab your notebook, get a mannequin, and let's get into some hair cutting. So when we're cutting a short bob, the first thing we want to do is section the hair away. So I've sectioned the hair into quadrants, and then in the back, I've separated the nape from the rest of the back. Now we want to start by setting our baseline. So whenever I'm figuring out where the length is that I want, especially with a short bob, I like to start by looking at the front. So we can decide, do we want the baseline to sit at the jaw, maybe a little bit below the jaw? Once you've determined that area that you want the length to hit, simply rock your comb around, and that tells you where to take your length up in the back. Now, you can also take it shorter if you want angles, but because we're going to create an even bob all the way around, start with determining your length and rock the comb all the way back to the neck. When cutting the perimeter length, it's important to break it down into small subsections. So I'm going to be working with my comb, and we're going to use the fine teeth to comb the hair down. Now I've already determined where I want that length to sit. So once I've achieved that length, I'm just gonna push the hair down into no elevation, and I'm gonna cut a blunt baseline. Now we are gonna create some layering in this bottom hair, so I'm not that worried about keeping everything super square or super blunt, but we wanna make sure that we are creating the guide for the length of the rest of the bob haircut. So just get your baseline length cut in, and then we're gonna layer. A tip whenever you're cutting the perimeter of a bob haircut is to make sure that you're standing in front of your subsection. So that allows you to keep the hair in its natural fall, and then easily push it into no elevation to get a really strong perimeter line. Before you layer, make sure you have the perimeter line exactly where you want it. Now we're going to create a little bit of an undercut. So don't be scared. When I say undercut, we're just creating a little bit of softness in the ends so that we can prevent this bob from getting too wide. Because the last thing we want is to feel kind of like a coconut head. So when we're creating a short bob, we want to do these small bits to make it feel really chic. So when I'm working in the nape here, we're just going to take the little bit of weight away from the corner so that it doesn't feel as heavy and blunt. The way we're going to do this is by lifting the section up. So elevation creates layers. Now I'm gonna lift the section up, and we're gonna wait to see that the length has dropped out. Because we did just set a perimeter length, but we wanna make sure that we don't disturb it when we're layering. So lift the hair up. I'm lifting it slightly above 90 degrees, and that's where I'm gonna make my cut. You can see that that length has dropped out right here. And now we can go in to create the undercut. Now, I'm creating this with point cutting, but you can blunt cut if you want. I think the point cutting keeps it a little bit softer, so I like to keep that kind of movement in the haircut. And another thing to keep in mind, as you're creating this underlayer, for the corners, make sure that you're pulling them back square. So rather than standing directly in front of the section when doing this layering, pull the corners back. That's going to prevent you from cutting too much hair around where the hairline curves, and it'll help preserve some of that extra length as we move to the front. This is one of those little secrets when you're doing a bob haircut. A lot of the layering happens internally because a bob is pretty much known for feeling like a strong shape with a nice heavy perimeter line. So you don't want to really disturb that perimeter too much. We're just creating the layers internally, and then we're going to have the rest of the graduated bobs sit on top. When I pull this section out that we just cut, take a close look at what we created. You'll see we have the strength of the length. It gets a little bit graduated as it goes to the top, and then that layering kind of evens out. So the result feels a little bit softer, and it's a lot more flattering on the neck. Once you feel good with your baseline, we're gonna move on to the back section. So I'm gonna release the section, and we're gonna find just the back. I'm not going to include the crown yet. So if I'm placing the comb flat on the head, I'm looking to see where that comb is lifting off, and that tells me where the head shape is changing direction. That's where we're going to go ahead and take a horizontal parting to divide the back from the crown. Now we're going to connect the back length into the perimeter line that we just created. So with minimal tension, comb the hair down with the fine teeth. And once the hair is combed into natural fall, you're going to connect it to your baseline. You'll notice as we're cutting this baseline that we're not connecting to the layering that we created underneath, we're just connecting to the line at the bottom. So once again, that layering we created is going to be more internal, and it's more to collapse the shape of the nape. So if you can imagine this from the side, usually your nape looks really wide and bulbous. Because we layered underneath, now this hair is going to sit on top with a really cute little curve. Now the next step is a little bit of graduation. So we don't want to overlayer this hair, but we want to give it a little bit of movement working through the top section. So I'm going to decide where I want that weight point of the layer to sit. So you're going to take a small piece from the top of that section, and you're going to look and see where you want to create a little bit of volume and a little bit of movement. So once you've found that place, you're just going to make your cut, and that's going to be your guideline for the graduation. Keep it low. Don't go too high or it's going to lean into more of a stacked bob. And once you have your guideline, you can go ahead, keep everything at a very low elevation, and then just graduate that corner of weight. So now we have our undercut, we're gonna have our baseline, and now we're gonna have a little bit of graduation. So you're creating a lot of layered elements while keeping the hair still feeling overall pretty much one length. We don't want to over-direct our sections too much at this point, so we're just working with that same guideline all the way around. And remember to keep your elevation at a low 45 degrees and only cut to that guideline you created for the graduation. So you'll start to see that this is going to go from feeling very blunt at the bottom to having a very slight curve. And that's that little extra feminine touch that makes a short bob look really cute. So here's a really good visual. We finished cutting the right side of that hair, and then we have the left side, which is completely uncut. So you can see the slight difference in the graduation on the right side as opposed to the left side, which doesn't have any layering yet at all. So this is great. If you want to have more of a blunt look, you can keep that shape very blunt at the bottom. But since we're creating something a little bit softer, that graduation on the other side is going to be what we want overall for the haircut. So I'm going to go ahead and graduate the opposite side before we move on to the top. You can see my guideline right through here. That's what we want to see before we make any cuts. So I know that it'll be even all the way around. If you're not confident with your angles or you have problems seeing how you're elevating the hair, use your mirror as your tool. So in the salon, as I'm elevating, I would be looking at you guys and you'd be my mirror, and that would tell me where my elevation is. So I can see here, when I look in the mirror, if I'm elevated at 45 degrees. And then I can just follow my cutting line to create the graduation. Notice how that corner of weight was cut, but we maintained that length at the very bottom. So as it combs out, you can see we still have our perimeter length, but then there's that slight bit of graduation that's sitting right on top, and that's how we get that really beautiful curve. So I'm feeling really good about this graduation here. we're going to start moving on to the front and connecting that graduation forward. We're going to take this parting that we've created in the back and we're just going to connect it to the front. Now go ahead and set your baseline. So comb the hair down, hold it square, and cut. Okay, now before we move on to the other side, I'm going to create a little bit of that graduation in the bottom as well. We're using a small panel from the back section as a guide, and I'm grabbing that hair and over directing to the previous section, elevating at a low 45 and connecting to my guide. Now I'm continuing to over direct to the previous section as I work to the front. So I'm always just looking for that little bit of graduation right here, and that's where I'm going to make my cut. The key to continuously finding that section is to make sure that your elevation is consistent the entire time. So like we talked about earlier, just make sure to use that mirror to double check yourself that you're elevating the hair at a 45-degree angle, and then you should be able to find that slight guide from the previous section, which will tell you where you can create the corner and get that graduation. I'm on my last section in the front. So now we've connected the perimeter line to the front, and then we create a little bit of graduation to round the ends out. And so once again, this is going to prevent that hair from looking too square or blocky and gives it a really feminine touch. Let's repeat this on the other side. So remember, we're going to connect that parting from the back to the front. Once you have your section, comb the hair down into natural fall and connect the back baseline to the front line. Now we're taking our back panel as a guide, and now I'm going to start taking sections from the front, over directing to the previous section, and connecting our graduation. And you can take the next panel. We're taking a small parting from the previous section, and now we can connect our guide. And remember, it's very little that we're cutting off the ends. We're just graduating it slightly to create that little bit of bend. If we're layering too much in this section, it's going to result in too much short layering throughout the haircut. So at this point, you should really just be cutting corners of weight and creating a little bit of graduation through the very ends. And in the top, that's where we'll start to really exaggerate that graduation and get a little bit of movement. So now we're going to connect the layers in the crown to the graduation we started in the back. We're going to take pie-shaped sections that radiate from the high point of the head. So they're going to look almost like those little triangles you'd see in a basketball or a beach ball, but all of those subsections will radiate from the high point of the head. I'll take the first subsection in the center. And now let's look to find where our graduation is. So you can see the line of graduation that we've started. We're going to connect that line all the way up into the crown. So make sure that you're standing in front of your subsection, and that way you get an even amount of layers. Keep your elevation consistent with that low 45 degree of the haircut. So I'm combing the grain of that hair, pulling it to a 45-degree angle, and then I'm only going to graduate from the top of my guide. I'm going to recomb that top section just to check. Perfect. Next subsection, remember it's radiating off the high point of the head. Comb the hair out of the way, and I'm going to grab a small panel from my previous section. So you can kind of see what's happening here. All of the layering is happening just in the crown, and that's going to keep the shape of the bob while giving it a little bit of lift and a little bit of movement and preventing it from looking too blocky at the very bottom. Now we have our last subsection. Once again, over directing to the previous section and connecting our guide. All right, I'm feeling good with that, so we're gonna repeat the process on the other side. Now we have a small panel from our previous section to help guide us, and that's gonna tell us if our line of graduation is correct. So I'm gonna pull the hair down to its elevation, make sure that I'm following my guideline, and connect. If it's easier for you, I would suggest dropping out any of the hair that you're not cutting and just leaving a small amount of the guide. That way you have less hair in your hands to work with as you're cutting, so you'll get a cleaner result that way. And we're on our last subsection. So remember, we're just over-directing the previous section, dropping out the hair I'm not cutting, elevate to 45 degrees, and connect to the guideline. So here's the graduated shape. What I'm gonna do now is simply cross-check the top of the section. And as I do that, I'm going to point cut to soften out the weight at the very top. So what we're doing is simply pulling that hair back down to 45 degrees. We're looking for the line of graduation we just created. And I'm gonna go in and notch a little bit of weight out of that line. We're gonna do that all the way around. So I'm just pulling this hair, keeping the elevation at 45 and looking for the line of graduation at the top of the section. Once we're finding it, just notching the weight away. So here you see that's the line at the top of the section. My fingers are bailing out just at the very ends, and then holding the shears diagonally, we're able to maintain that length, but also create space. And that's what's gonna give texture in this haircut while still keeping that sense of a one length shape with a small amount of graduation at the bottom. This is also a good technique that you can do if you ever are creating a stacked bob or a graduated bob and you just want to make sure that the top of the section doesn't feel too heavy. Because I know that I've done this haircut before in the salon, and there have been times when I go back in and when it's dry, it's completely blunt. It's so heavy. So because the hair is wet, there's a lot more hair condensed into the section, and we can really remove that line of weight sitting at the top much more easily when it's wet. Now you can really see from the side view what this cut has done for the shape. To cut the top sections, we're going to over direct to the previous section once again, and just follow that line of graduation all the way up. So I'm going to take my first panel, and I'm using a panel from the back as a guide. And let's comb the hair and see what we're going to cut before we even touch the hair. So I'm combing the hair down into low elevation. You can see where the line of graduation is starting. If I were to drop out all of that hair, that gets in my guide. Pull it down to the right elevation, which, let's see if you remember, what's the elevation here? If you guessed 45, you got it. Found my guide, and now I'm just gonna cut. Always comb the hair down so you can see the shape as you're cutting. And you'll notice this beautiful roundness that's starting to happen. So I'm gonna take my next subsection, take a small panel from the previous, comb the hair so I can see what I'm cutting. There's the guideline. Let's drop out the hair we're not going to cut. Now I can just follow the guideline to graduate the front. At the very front panel here, if I were to continue my way all the way around the front, it's going to get a little bit shorter because the hairline curves up. Now, I actually don't mind this because we want a little bit of extra movement in the front of that haircut anyway. So I'm going to continue over directing to the previous section as I work to the front. But if you wanted to create a bob that still has a super strong perimeter all the way around, I would recommend pulling that hair back to the front corner. And that way you maintain more of that length and more of a bob effect in the front. But right now I'm over directing to the previous section, finding my guide, and cutting. And now for this fringe, take a small piece, again, over directing the previous section, finding that guide, and cutting. And we have one last section. So over direct, elevate 45, always find your cutting guide, and cut. Now, if you're really loving this haircut, but maybe you don't have any clients that take their hair this short, you can still use the same technique on longer hair. So it's a great way to even turn a long bob into something very chic and flirty. And it just is a technique that's good for taking away that heavy bluntness without over layering the hair. Because so many of us want that movement in our haircuts, especially when we're giving it to clients who have fine hair, medium texture, but we don't want to over layer that hair. And it's really easy to get a little crazy with that layering. And then suddenly we don't have any fullness, or suddenly we have too many choppy layers. So this graduation technique, the same sectioning pattern we used, the same cutting methods, can be done on any length. So keep that in mind. You can definitely customize this for any of your clients. Don't forget too, this is a lot of hair to work with, so always drop that section out that you're not cutting, and that way you're only left with your guideline to cut. And I'm over directing to the previous section, so that's giving me an even amount of graduation as I work to the front. So you can already see how cute and rounded this bob is without looking too stacked or too layered. And this is that moment where your client is really happy because she has that shortcut now and it's not looking too blocky or too thick at the bottom. So what we're gonna do is we're going to create a little bit of extra texture when the hair is dry, but this is the overall shape of the bob cut. I'm gonna blow dry it with some product and then show you how to refine it to give a lot of wispy, fun movement while still maintaining this cute little graduated shape we created. Before blow drying, I'm putting a little bit of the Kenra Silkening heat cream just to give the hair some extra heat protection and also to give it a nice silky smooth finish. So because we're doing a little bit of extra cutting afterwards, I want the hair to still feel soft and movable so we can see the movement that we created. This product's perfect for leaving the hair feeling touchable while still pumping a little bit of volume and giving a silky finish. So we just finished blow drying the bob, and as you can see, we have a nice short length that's hitting just below the jaw. Now, there are some points that we need to refine. So one of them is that we have a nice weight line of graduation that we want to soften out. And we also want to make sure to address any baby hairs that might be hanging out of the neckline right here. So that's the first thing we're going to do. I always ask my clients to tilt their head down, and that's going to reveal any of those little pesky baby hairs that we might have missed during the cut. In the salon, you can place your hand right onto the hair and lay it flat to the neck. That's going to show you the perimeter line that you cut in, and it's going to allow you to really see any of those little baby hairs and just refine them. We don't have too many baby hairs here to refine since we took small sections and created a pretty clean perimeter. So I'm just going through, combing the hair down nice and smooth, and then seeing if there's any little strays that we need to cut. In a real life situation, you might have a client who has an interesting neckline. There are necklines that are shaped like a V, there's W's, there's so many different necklines that you might be dealing with. So every client is going to have a different level of refinement that's going to need to be done here. Okay, we're going to push the head back up. Just check for natural fall if that perimeter line is hanging where you want it to go, and then you're good. The next step that we want to do is we want to address any of the weight lines that might have happened from the graduation we created. This is a really simple part. We're going to take the top section of the hair because that's where the line is coming from, and we're going to hold it at a low elevation where we cut it. Now you're visibly able to see the blunt line that we need to release. So I'm going to recomb, I'm looking for that blunt line, and I'm bailing my fingers out so that I can leave some ends to cut. Now once I have the space here to cut, my shear is coming in at a slight diagonal, and I'm just slowly releasing that weight line. Make sure that you don't notch it too much because we want to release the weight line, but we don't want to turn it into something that's too overly layered. And you also don't want to create any extra layers that you're going to need to texturize even more. So I'm being very careful and just looking as I release the weight to see if I'm getting to the desired result. That feels a lot softer, so now I can drop that. And when you comb it down, you can see that area is a lot more seamless. So I'm going to repeat that all the way around the back, just looking for those blunt lines, and then point cutting to release them. Now, one thing I like to do if I want to build a little bit more layering is I'll drop what I just cut, I'll elevate the hair a little bit higher, and then I'll continue texturizing. So we're not creating another short, precise layer, but by texturizing with a higher elevation, we're cutting in another shape. So it gives you a little bit more layering without necessarily creating a stacked look. So you can release the blunt line. Comb and check. And now I'm going to drop some of that hair, elevate a little bit higher, and I'll continue softening out that line, just to create a little extra layering. Once the hair is combed out, you can see how much more seamless the transition of graduation is on the side that's been texturized versus the side that we haven't cut. Now, if you want to spread the section apart to make it a little bit easier, I'll sometimes grab it with my fingers and then make my hand go into a fist. And you'll see how now the hair is spread apart, so it's easier to insert the shear and create the texture. So this is a great way to deal with really large sections so that you can still get a really soft edge and work with a large amount of hair all at once. And when it comes back together, you can see how soft that is while still maintaining the line that we created in the haircut. And I'm going to release a little bit, elevate the hair higher, and add just a little bit more layering onto the top of the section. Now you can really see the difference in the entire back, how we started with a heavier weight line, and just with a little bit of point cutting, we were able to diffuse it and still create a really cool graduated effect without the hair looking overly layered. So when we style it, there's all these fun little layers and pieces to work with, but when we comb the hair down, it still has a pretty nice bob effect. When we overlayer, especially at this length, there's a chance that we're going to turn the haircut into a shag. So while I am going in and diffusing my lines, I'm making sure that there's still a little bit of structure in the haircut because we want to keep it looking like a bob rather than a shag. Can also get into pixie territory if you're not careful. You see how this is a really large section of hair? We can take that section and just make a fist to spread the hair out, and that makes it a lot easier to diffuse this line. Now, as we're texturizing, I just want to remind you how important it is to prep the hair correctly before you start cutting. So we don't want to blow dry the hair with a ton of bevel right now because we're still cutting into the shape and we want to be able to see those cutting lines and the lengths where they fall naturally. So I blow dried the hair with a paddle brush and then a little bit of a boar bristle round brush just to polish the ends but keep it straight. If we used a thermal round brush and we got a lot of bevel at this point, we're not going to be able to see our cutting line. It's going to be a lot harder to achieve a soft texture. So prep the hair to dry cut with smoothing it out first, and then we can do all of our styling afterwards. For one final touch, I'm going to take the very front section. We're going to elevate the section up high, and I'm going to create a little bit of softness in this layering right here. So I'll do some pretty deep notching just to add a little bit of movement in the front. Once I created that softness in the ends, I'm going to go a little bit deeper, and I'm just going to do some slicing. So I'm slicing from the mid strand to the ends. Now, the reason that I'm choosing to layer the hair this way is because as opposed to a traditional face frame, I still want it to feel like a bob, but I want to create all of that movement. So this is a cool way to get those layers in the front without taking away that front baseline of the bob. Now when the hair comes back, you'll see how much softer it is. And now when the hair is curled, there's going to be a lot more layers to style and show off. So I'm feeling pretty good about the bob shape right now. We're gonna go into some styling, and then I'm gonna show you what it looks like after. So here's the final style for the short bob haircut. I switched it over to a side part, so although we cut it in the center, your clients are gonna have the ability to wear it in a center part, or they can flip it to the side for a little bit more texture. You can see all of the graduated layers that we put in give it a fun little bite without giving it too much of a choppy look, and it doesn't feel stacked at all despite the little bit of the undercut and the extra layers we did in the back. So I really hope you learned something fun in this haircut. Let me know what you learned in the comments. And if you loved this video, follow Kenra Professional for more, and I'll see you in the next one.